What are your biggest life learnings, if let's say from the corporate world that you were in?
I think the nice thing about the corporate space, especially if you do it first before you get into something, say on your own, is it gives you a lot of structure.
Do you think like perhaps the business or the startup ecosystem in India is currently doing fine?
India is a great place right now,
Yeah.
to be very honest, to do business. And I think a lot of the startups have found that, having a good idea.
Does it really matter that a person has an MBA from so-and-so institute?
We just have the kind of volumes where it's very difficult to gauge whether someone has qualified or has the necessary qualifications.
What was, when you written the first book, what drew you towards writing?
Started writing the first book really as a way to kind of keep myself occupied and sort of intellectually challenged, even though.
What's the mission and the purpose behind Agastya?
We would say one of the largest NGOs in India. And they're doing some phenomenal work in education and have been doing so for the last 25 years.
Do you also believe that, writing fictional character stories or even non-fiction, when you write, you do discover a lot about your own self as well?
Ultimately, you write what you know. And you should, I hope, know yourself quite well enough.
Hello and welcome everyone to POV Unpopular. Today I have Adhirath Sethi in the studio with me. He is an alumni of the London School of Economics, and then later, after a short stint into the corporate world, he is currently a businessman and an entrepreneur based out of Bangalore. He is a trustee and a board member of the Agastya International Foundation, which is what majorly we are going to talk about in the podcast. So I'm not going to introduce Agastya. For all those who know, very good. For those who don't know, please listen to the podcast. Because we have talked a lot about Agastya, and it's truly an inspirational organization, very inspirational story. So I personally really enjoyed talking about Agastya. Also now coming back to the guest, Adhirath, he's also an author. He has written 3 books so far. The first 2 were into crime space, and the third one is a non-fiction, and it's about the journey of Agastya Foundation from the beginning to the end, with several anecdotes, with several stories, with several inspirational interviews from a lot of people who have been associated with Agastya. So if I have to talk about it, it's a must read for anyone, especially for people who want to perhaps venture into social entrepreneurship, or who just want to go through a really good case study of an organization that started from scratch and today is literally moving mountains, which is also the name of the book. So stay tuned and enjoy this very inspirational, very heartfelt, genuine podcast with us. Hello and welcome, Adhirath ji. Welcome to the show. First of all, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. It's lovely in Delhi right now, so I'm quite happy.
So is Delhi treating you well?
Yes, your roads are quite nice, and it was convenient getting here. And yeah, we were looking around and saying that it's a lovely time to actually be here. So yeah.
Except the weather, I guess.
Well, it's a little warm, but it's nice.
Okay. So we'll begin the podcast with you. And so first of all, you are so many things. You are an author, you are a businessman, you are a philanthropist, you're also associated with Agastya. So many hats you're wearing. But if someone has to ask you to define yourself in perhaps one word or one sentence, how would you define yourself?
I think the way you describe it, I could be described as distracted as well. But I think with Agastya, the thing that you realize is you'd like to be described as curious.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of that ends up happening, and that's probably why different hats get worn, because you're always kind of trying to explore whether there's some fun or joy to be had in doing something else.
Okay.
Now, in my case, it kind of came about with a bit of structure, in the sense that there was a business, and within that business there was a lull a while back, and so writing kind of took that, took the space that was kind of left, the void, and so that became a passion on the side. And Agastya was evolving in the background, to be honest, as a foundation. And at some point, getting on the board and getting more involved in the higher, you could say, level decisions that were being made became its own kind of passion, because you realized, okay, someone's doing something really good here. And so you'd like to be a part of this, and you want to be a part of that story. And at some point, the book writing and Agastya kind of seemed to have merged. And that's why we're here today, because, the book got written as a result.
Okay. So we will talk about Agastya in the book, but before that, a little about yourself. You have been you have been into corporate as well before. So, like, what are your biggest life learnings, if I may ask? Perhaps, let's say, from the corporate world that you were in, or perhaps from the London School of Economics that you were in. What have been some of your life learnings so far?
I think the nice thing about the corporate space, especially if you do it first before you get into something, say on your own, is it gives you a lot of structure. And I think that's true even of education. You know, a lot of times you see people who are very brilliant but probably haven't been educated. And you see that there's a kind of it's very disparate, their thoughts and the way they kind of work isn't necessarily structured. So structure becomes extremely important because it's not something you can often develop, on your own. It kind of comes from working with a team or working with a certain deadline in mind. So I think bringing that across was great. It allowed me to quickly, apply it to my own, efforts as an entrepreneur. It helps me to apply it to Agastya also in some sense. And I think the other thing, a lot of folks think, okay, if I've done one thing, then doing something tangential may not be a great idea. But I do believe that, efforts do compound. So whatever you're doing, provided you're doing it productively and with the right level of the right attitude, I think you'll find in some way it transmits to, the next leg of your journey, as you were. So knowing how to, say, come up with ideas, it doesn't necessarily need to be restricted to ideas in the corporate space. The same thought process, the same, tricks or, whatever else, life hacks as we call them, can be applied in other areas. So I think it was good. Corporate gave me a structure, which I then, applied. But other than that, just generally keeping oneself busy, I think is a great way to keep building your, to keep leveling up, as it were.
Talking a little bit more about the business and perhaps the corporate world, do you think like perhaps the business or the startup ecosystem in India is currently doing fine? Or, what do you see are some of the challenges, if I say, perhaps for especially the business and the startup ecosystem currently in India?
Well, I think business is actually, India is a great place right now, to be very honest, to do business. And I think a lot of the startups have found that, having a good idea, at least maybe up until maybe 2 years ago, was a great launching pad for, getting a lot of funding. To link it back to Agastya, I think a lot of good that happened out of Agastya was, in fact, a lack of funding right in the beginning. It forced the organization to think very creatively about where it was going to spend, because every rupee was being, measured against the weight of, how difficult it was to raise. And that allowed a lot of very out of the box, very tangential, almost today's people are like, wow, how did you guys think of that? Well, because we were desperate and had to have a solution that was not necessarily expensive. I think the startup space today, and recent news has kind of only fueled this more, is that if you throw too much money at something right up front, there is a tendency to take it very lightly and say that any problem can be potentially solved by just throwing enough money at it, because we have that much funding, backing us. And some of the very good startups that have emerged have actually probably done so with probably very weak Series 1 and Series 2 fundings. And they've been forced, like Agastya was, to really think about, the business model. How do you actually create profit when there is a gun to your head and there's a time clock ticking, as it were.
And the resources are limited.
Yeah. And so I think it's good. The startup space is great. And it's great that we have entrepreneurs who want to do something, that starting new companies and stuff. It's a great chapter for India. But I think there is a joy, I would say, I suppose a joy in the discipline involved in using your funds very, very judiciously.
Correct. Okay. So now moving a little bit towards the writing part, you have written, I suppose, 3 books by now. The first 2 was somewhere related to the crime space, and the third one is related to Agastya's journey. So first of all, what drew you towards writing? What was, when you written the first book, what drew you towards writing?
So my first book actually was, as I said, around 2008. So I just started my business. Unfortunately, the financial crisis hit, very sort of inopportunely, I suppose, just at that time. And so there was about a 6, maybe 8 month lull in work. This just was not enough work to keep me busy the whole day. And so I started writing the first book really as a way to kind of keep myself occupied and sort of intellectually challenged, even though it was nice because I could write and it was like being on call. I could just get up at any time and go into my plant because I have a factory. So it didn't stop me from being present. At the same time, I wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. And at some point, I'd written a draft behind my back. My wife gave it to the publishers, and I suddenly got a call from them saying, look, this seems to be a very good draft, but we have to work on it a little more. And so then that's kind of where the story started. And because I enjoyed it, because it was genuinely a fun exercise, I realized that, okay, if I can, even when work picked up, if at the end of the day I can devote maybe 2 or 3 hours to doing this, it didn't seem to be taking too much out of me in terms of, it was fun. So obviously, like anything that's fun, you kind of look forward to doing it at the end of the day. It didn't feel like work. So it really felt like something out of my, usual space. So that's kind of how writing came to me. It just became a very nice thing that I got to do outside work. And then in 2019, Agastya was thinking about charting because 1999 is when the foundation started officially. So 2019 was our 20th year. And there was this idea that, look, a lot of folks have been very instrumental in building up Agastya, and it's important to get their perspective, to get their viewpoints, to get their impression of how the journey is unfolded, and start tabulating that and bringing it into a kind of a repository, as it were. So we had this idea to write the story of Agastya and how it was started and how it built up. And at some point, I put my hand up and said, look, because we tried to get ghostwriters, but we weren't finding anyone also at the right price point. And so I said, look, I'm happy to do this in my free time. I might need a little more time than a ghostwriter would do it in, but if we're happy to wait, then it's fine. Then, of course, COVID came and there was a lot of restriction, and we ourselves weren't quite sure where the foundation was headed because there was a lot to be rethought, as it were, in terms of our operations. So we put a pause in it, and then again around 2022, we said, let's pick it up again. So it took me about 2 years to write the book because we had to interview close to 100 folks, so right from very eminent, corporate leaders like Narayan Murthy and Desh Deshpande, down to, I suppose, Agastya's frontline staff. We want to get their viewpoints and put their voice in the book as well. So it's an entire spectrum of folks that we wanted to speak with. Agastya management, as you said, understanding how the leadership evolved. And so all that had to be so about 6 or 7 months went in interviews. And towards the end, when I was about 90% done, I said, I can probably now start writing the book. So that took maybe another 6 or 7 months. So end to end, it was about 18 to 24 months, the journey was. And now we're finally, at a stage where we want to promote it and get the word out there.
Okay. So perhaps for any wannabe writers listening to us, do you have any writing ritual as such, or anything like when you sit down to writing, any non-negotiables like that?
I think most writers might agree that when the idea hits you, you want to sit down and write it.
Okay.
And so I've been very guilty of stealing time, even sometimes during work, just because it's kind of a needle at the back of your mind, which is saying, look, if we don't get these words out now, you might actually forget, oh, it's a very nice turn of a phrase or a nice sentence, so you want to put that down. Other than that, I do, of course, like silence. When in, so a good white noise, put on my headphones and put white noise, that works very well for me. But again, I think writers will attest to the fact that once you're in the flow, then I don't think anything really bothers you. You're just kind of getting everything and you just want to be involved in the process itself. So for me, that works, kind of getting myself into a silent room and having the idea just take root. But a lot of the times, yes, you might just be in a situation where whatever happens, I need to just sit down and write this right now.
Okay. Do you also believe that, writing fictional characters, stories, or even non-fiction, when you write, you do discover a lot about your own self as well, apart from the story or the characters? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times you, experiment in some sense with someone that maybe you're not. But wouldn't it be strange if I was this person? And then you write the character out in terms of how you would behave if that was a character trait that you had. And it's interesting to think that, okay, if I was slightly different, or if this person that I knew was put in this situation otherwise, how would they react, right? And so a lot of writing initially for me was centered around what ifs. Like, what if you had a person who was like this, but then you threw this into the mix? And then running that simulation in your head and saying, okay, how would that story play out? So apart from this, there's short stories and stuff that I've written, which is basically born out of these very strange kind of thoughts in your head, which sometimes just make you think, okay, what if this happened and then that happened? And how would that, scenario kind of play out? So yeah, there's a lot of that to writing. And I guess ultimately you write what you know. And you should, I hope, know yourself quite well enough to to expect how you might react in that kind of situation. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so far I think we have touched upon Agastya in bits and pieces, but let's talk about Agastya for anyone listening to us who has no idea what Agastya is. So let's talk what it is, like what's the mission and the purpose behind Agastya, and what the organization is doing as of today. What are the plans perhaps in the future for Agastya?
Yeah, so Agastya today is, we would say, one of the largest NGOs in India. And they're doing some phenomenal work in education and have been doing so for the last 25 years. We started, or rather the co-founders started Agastya with this idea that education in India is, people are encouraged obviously to get good marks. We have great colleges turning out, very intelligent, students. But there is maybe a lack of creativity, especially at the grassroots level. That, we have a lot of what's called answerism, whereas, kids want to get the right answer rather than understanding why that is the right answer. Right? So a lot of us who have been through the Indian education system have been witnessed that, okay, you're asking questions, but ultimately the teacher just wants you to get the right answer. Or you have this idea that you'd like to explore this subject, but ultimately the pressure of doing well in exams kind of takes precedence, and then you have to just focus on getting good marks, because how do you get to the next level if you don't do that? Agastya's idea was, this is fine, but it's going to lead to a generation of kids who probably aren't as creative and curious as you'd want them to be. And that India might get left behind unless it infused creativity and curiosity and innovative thought back into the education system. So the idea was, okay, there are government schools where kids do learn from teachers and they have textbooks, and there is a national education kind of a curriculum that, and a syllabus that's followed. What if we could supplement this? What if we could take some of the teachers, train them at, Agastya's, campus, and they get a higher appreciation for the kind of work that they're doing, because teaching is, at the end of the day, an extremely important, role that, you play. And what if we could then take hands-on experiments, science experiments, to the schools? And teach these kids that, okay, you've learned about, for example, the solar system today, or you've learned how chemical reactions work, or you learned how an engine works. So now here's a model of the solar system, and this is how the planets move around the sun, and this is how eclipses happen. This is why seasons, So when a child sees something in that setting, in a very hands-on setting, it really complements what they've learned already in the textbook. And for many kids who actually find it tough to use the written word as a way of downloading information, this becomes for them a really great catalyst in terms of helping them understand concepts that maybe otherwise they would just gone through school saying, I kind of never got it, right? So Agastya started this network of mobile vans. So we have a campus in Andhra Pradesh in Kuppam, which serves as the main ideation hub. It's a beautiful 172-acre campus, and it has labs, and a lot of the teachers go there for training, and a lot of the instructors go there to kind of get refresher courses. And we have students who come from surrounding schools as well to the campus every day. And they get to work in these labs, and they get to interact with these teachers. And they get a very rich experience because of their proximity to the campus. But apart from the campus, we have a hub and spoke model. So we have science centers in about 22 states, peppered around the country, basically. And from these science centers, you would have mobile vans, bikes coming, taking experiments, so curating those experiments to the school day of the children that they're going to meet. So if it's a 6th standard or 7th standard or 8th standard class, you would say, okay, this is what they're learning right now in the 8th standard. So I'm going to take these 5 or 10 experiments, and this is what we're going to do with the kids today. And the vans go to the larger schools, and the bikes, they kind of go even deeper into rural India. And so we reach schools of even some cases 5 kids, 10 kids sitting on the floor, and they're learning from the textbook. And suddenly they see this guy on a bike coming in with this box full of experiments. And then they get this 2-hour interactive session with someone that really shows them how each of these things work, in a very important way. And what we've seen is that when children are engaged in this manner, and they have access to these kinds of resources, that of course it sparks curiosity. It nurtures their own creativity. They start thinking about science in a very different way. A lot of the models are very low cost. We make them intentionally with stuff that you might even find anywhere in your house. So a lot of these kids go back and start experimenting on the experiments, saying, can I remake that, or can I figure out a way to do that at home? And what it ends up being is a very holistic supplement to the kind of education that these kids get anyway. And so Agastya has done a phenomenal job in reaching out. We now reach about 5 million kids every year. And we're very proud of the fact that a lot of these kids turn around, and the kind of reaction we get is that we love when Agastya comes and visits our school, and we really look forward to those 2 hours or 4 hours every week that we get to spend. And it's nice, that's kind of what you want when you're an NGO. You want to have that kind of impact.
Correct. Were there any challenges per se, especially perhaps in the beginning when Agastya started, for Agastya to do what it's doing? Or was it always like Agastya got all the support perhaps from the government, from the state officials, whatever? Like, was there always a support, or were there some challenges as well attached to it?
It was extremely challenging, for a number of reasons. India is a country where education is already seen as something we do quite well. We do pride ourselves on, thankfully, we're a culture that has always said education is important. So Agastya was trying to push against saying that, yes, while that's true, there are certain aspects that we'd like to improve. Now, the urgency of that is probably not as high as, say, poverty or nutrition, where in India we genuinely had, especially in 1999, when Agastya was starting out, people were looking at saying that, look, education, great, but we have much more pressing, what we call here and now problems that have to be solved immediately. And so coming into that space and saying we're trying to raise money for education was obviously an extremely tough sell. We're trying to position something that was going to have an impact maybe 30, 40, 50 years down the line, right? Because you teach a child curiosity today, you're not going to see the dividends immediately. If you feed a child today, obviously, immediately you've had an impact. So it was very true that there were here and now problems, and India had to obviously face those. And a lot of donors who had money were thinking, well, I need to kind of address those problems first. So come to me when these things are less urgent. So that was one issue that we faced. I think getting funding with a backdrop of, not quite having the urgency that some of the other, pressing problems had in India. The other thing, of course, was the model itself. Agastya was supposed to be a school, right? The campus that we have, the 172-acre campus in Andhra, was a campus designed for a residential school at that time. And it wasn't until we started doing science fairs, having sessions with workshops with kids in rural areas, that suddenly we realized, well, you can probably teach maybe 1,000 or 2,000 kids in a school, and every year you might have maybe 300 or so graduate. Or you could have impact on a much, much larger scale. So I think they compared it to raising the level of the ocean by 1 millimeter versus filling a glass with water, right? So a glass with water would be a school where you have few kids, you really take all these concepts and kind of really skill them up, or take the entire system and try and just raise it just a little bit, because if you can give enough kids who appreciate the value of curiosity, who appreciate what creativity can do for them, then you might just see in many, many little pockets of India, kids that's kind of coming out of their shells and trying to do something different. So it was difficult because the model itself had to pivot at a very early stage. So I think 2 or 3 years into Agastya's journey, suddenly they decided, okay, we're shifting from a campus to mobile vans, right? And it was also a cost factor. Obviously, it was a lot cheaper to run a mobile network, and you could scale it up in stages, whereas to build a campus, from the ground up would have required a huge amount of money. So these were the kind of challenges initially. And then obviously, as the foundation evolved, I think the challenges were around the pedagogy, to find out, okay, what kind of teaching methods work and how do we fine-tune those. Agastya spent a lot of time, because as I said, it's 2-hour sessions with kids. So a lot of the time goes into defining the efficiency of that session. Right? When you only have 2 hours, say a week, with a group of kids, you want every minute to actually be extremely, vital. And so the richness across those 2 hours has to be studied. And so a lot of work goes into training the instructors, or igniters as we call them, to understand the value of that time and to make sure that they're utilizing it. So Agastya's challenges have been and continue to be, many.
Correct.
But I think at every stage they've kind of shown that they're more than up to the challenge. So that's good.
And how about like the support from perhaps the government or the state officials? Because I remember talking behind, like backstage, you were saying that the government has been somewhat supportive of this, is
Yeah.
it?
So obviously, when you have something like this and you prove it time and again, Agastya is now in 22 states. So obviously, that's 22 state governments that have stepped forward and given support and said, yes, you have our blessing to do what you're doing. And we've, I think, rarely encountered a situation where someone turns around and says, oh, you guys aren't doing a good job. It's normally been extremely well appreciated. Being in Karnataka and Andhra and, of course, Tamil Nadu, that's the kind of hub of where the Kuppam campus is. Being in that area has allowed us to tap into the government support there to a great extent. So a lot of the initial workshops we did were then appreciated by the government. The Karnataka government stepped forward and said, look, if you can do this across the state, we'd love it. In some areas in North Karnataka, we do believe we have 100% kind of coverage. So we visit pretty much every government school, and every school is part of the Agastya network there. So that would not happen without government support. Recently in Telangana and in Andhra, we've started doing something called the TSAT. That is we transmit Agastya content in video format to the classrooms directly through their satellite program. And the government has installed screens in classrooms, and it's become an extremely effective way to get content, again, where you can't necessarily physically reach a lot of these kids, you don't have that kind of scale, then at least being able to show them these concepts on video is great. And so there's a lot of other governments that have now stepped forward, state governments saying we want to do something similar, have a broadcast program, and then have these go directly into government school classrooms. And as that grows and expands, we hope that the Agastya content will then be able to piggyback and benefit from that, because they need content and we need the infrastructure. So it really works well that we're building all this content, and it's rich, and it has been proven again and again to work with children, that they really reciprocate and they really absorb the way that Agastya has been teaching them. And so as the infrastructure allows us, we will obviously be able to expand and continue doing that.
Okay. Talking about your journey with Agastya, is there any key moment or memory that you have with Agastya, which sort of like felt like, okay, this is why I am here. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing, like something like that?
Obviously as a board member, there's a lot of moments where you see key inflection points happening in front of you. There's a lot of that tends to happen, decisions that are taken on the spot. One that comes to mind is, although it was a hard decision, it was during COVID, when Agastya decided, I think, well before there was any lockdown, that we're not going to expose our staff to this, right? So Ramji Raghavan, our co-founder and chairman, had what he called the daughter test. And he said, look, the question is very simple. If I would not let my daughter go out and do this, then I shouldn't be allowing any of our people to do it. So and then of course, I think the entire management took we had this discussion with the staff that either everybody takes a 15% pay cut for the short term till this all, tides over, or we need to kind of, let people go. And unanimously, the team was like, no, we'll all take a little bit of a hit, but no one's leaving, So those kind of things tell you that the organization, apart from the fact that it's doing extremely good work, has somehow nurtured a culture of caring and confidence even within its own rank and file. And so that makes you feel, pretty good that, okay, this is an organization that's not just pushing creativity and curiosity and saying, hey, by the way, everybody needs to do it. But as you would say, they're walking the talk. They're saying that we can't do it unless we start imbibing these philosophies and living them as we are kind of teaching them as well. So I think that was a pretty big, thing that we, experienced. And other points, we've seen Agastya kind of do things that, even though it might be difficult in the short term, they were kind of going to plow through. So especially in terms of areas where there's less coverage, for example, and we had, for example, corporates coming and saying, no, we need mobile vans, but we want them only in rural areas, right? And they didn't want the vans going into the more rural areas because your company logo is not getting advertised in the same way. So many of the a lot of the initial funding that came was specific to a region. And we found, okay, in Bombay and Bangalore, there's a lot of folks that want the city schools, even though they're rural schools or government schools in the city, to get Agastya vans. But maybe the funding is not as much there for the smaller areas where you have less visibility. So, and Agastya pushed extremely hard to make sure that these underserved areas were also, getting funded. And I think it took a lot of effort for them to say, okay, resources are going to go in this direction, even though it would be very easy for us to get more visibility servicing only the more urban government schools. So, decisions like that, I think, make you feel that, this is a great organization to be a part of. So, yeah.
And for anyone who wants to perhaps volunteer or associate with Agastya, like what can be done?
So, yeah, you can find out more. Agastya.org is the website. So definitely read up about what we've been doing. I think they've been quite good at putting out a lot of information out there. So if you want to know what Agastya does, there's ample sort of videos on YouTube. The website's quite informative. As far as joining is concerned, yes, you can definitely, it's a fairly non-hierarchical organization. So you can probably just walk into an office, and the Agastya office in Bangalore, for example, or call someone in Agastya and just say that, I'm pretty sure even if you just took an instructor, you saw a mobile van and asked the instructor, they'd probably be able to guide you as to the right person to give a call to. Agastya has done very well in getting the kind of people that really resonate with what they're trying to do. And I think if you're someone that is engaged and kind of enthusiastic, again, Ramji coined this term BEEs, because in the early stage of Agastya, we realized we needed teachers, we needed folks who had a B.Ed background, for example, but there just weren't enough. And there weren't enough youngsters who had that kind of educational background. So we started looking for graduates. Eventually, because we're an NGO and you can't really offer that kind of money, graduates started running thin as well. Yeah. So eventually we said, look, we'll take dropouts as well. We'll train them as long as. And so that's when Ramji coined this term of BEEs. He said, I'm looking for bachelors in energy and enthusiasm. So if you have those traits and you're looking to learn and you're looking to contribute, then, come on in and we'll train you and we'll make you a part of this journey and it'll be great. And we've been lucky because that attitude has really pulled a lot of folks who bring probably degrees, definitely, but oodles of enthusiasm. And Agastya has been notorious for hiring people, especially in some senior roles, without any specific role in mind. Just saying, okay, listen, you're the kind of person we want. We'd love to work with you. We love your attitude. Why don't you just join? And I guarantee you within a month, you will know exactly which area you need to kind of focus on. And so we've had folks join and then gradually take on a certain department or take on a certain, strain of Agastya's work, and they become experts at that. And it was purely organic.
Talking about the hiring process of Agastya that you were talking, and you're also the CEO of one more company, so you must be perhaps overseeing the hiring there as well. How do you think the hiring process today for the corporate is? Also, the question that I have in mind, does it really matter that a person has an MBA from so-and-so institute? Does that really matter? Or, more so like the skills or the attitude that the person is carrying, that should matter. What do you think?
Well, see, I think it's unfair to say in India that, you can just walk in without, we just have the kind of volumes where it's very difficult to, to gauge whether someone has, qualified or has the necessary qualifications. So unfortunately, we are in a state where, you kind of, it's tough to filter out because you just get too many applicants, as we've seen in many cases. It's like looking at a cricket average. It doesn't necessarily tell you that the guy is a great batsman. It tells you enough to say, okay, do I, give him a shot or not? Now, you may find that he's actually a phenomenal team player. He's a, like a superhuman fielder, and that comes a little later. We've been lucky because we haven't been able to offer that much money, that a lot of folks come in and we're able to evaluate them very subjectively and say, okay, fine, this guy may not have a degree, he may not necessarily have an MBA, but he certainly has, an X factor that we wouldn't find otherwise. And people definitely do get lucky sometimes in India to walk into organizations that kind of look at them in that way and say that, okay, maybe you've not got all the boxes checked, but you do seem to bring something that we wouldn't get otherwise. But it's also unfair to say that you can do it without. I think it's safer, I suppose, in India at this point to get your qualifications and then add on, curiosity and creativity and those kind of elements that you bring to the table on top of that. Rather than walk in and say, I'm not going to do a degree and just, wing it. Because we do have a lot of folks and it's tough to kind of separate, one from the other without some kind of paper trail that tells you, okay, at least this guy has done a few of the things that need to be done before getting to this level.
So it's safe to say that yes, it does have some advantage.
It does, and as I said, education does give you structure. You know, whatever said and done, I think it's not without value that you go through a process that gauges you on things like timeliness and whether you're able to actually structure your thoughts in a in a manner that another person reading them would say, yes, I see what this guy is saying. I think that does come with a certain amount of discipline, and yes, education does give you that. So,
okay. So coming back to Agastya, we were talking about impact in terms of the curiosity or the creativity that it instills in the students. But something as intangible as curiosity or creativity, like how do you even measure it? Like how do you see those changes?
Yeah, so it's been a question at Agastya as well, and it was an unanswered question, I would say, many years ago, because when we came along, it was almost like, well, if you're bringing creativity and curiosity and innovation, obviously that helps, right? Anyone that saw Agastya and saw the Indian education system, at least at the government school level, was saying that, look, you could only do good by adding this layer on top of what the kids are already learning. And for a while, that held us in good stead. And for a while, we could say, look, we've now reached, from last year, from 1 million kids, now we're at 1.5. And each time we reach new kids, the cost per, as we call it, exposure, which is, the cost of a single session with a child, we're trying to bring that metric down. So because Agastya had a very corporate, the folks who founded Agastya were from corporate backgrounds themselves, they understood early on that metrics are important. And eventually a donor is going to turn around and say, look, show me a number. So I know when I interviewed Narayan Murthy, for example, for the book, he was very clear. He said, look, the business world has this thing called ROI. It has a thing called earnings per share, right? So if you want to evaluate a company, it's very easy to look at maybe 3 or 4 numbers and immediately say, okay, fine, I may not know what's going on behind the scenes, but at least on the surface, this company seems to be doing quite well. And he quite clearly said the NGO space hasn't quite developed this as yet. And one of the things Agastya did early on was understand that without these kind of metrics in place, eventually a donor, especially a corporate donor, a single philanthropist might still say, look, I see your vision, as Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, for example, did when he invested, was able to take a call subjectively because he was one person with the vision that kind of aligned with Agastya's vision. So he was able to say, look, I see what you're doing, and I say it's worth it, even if you can't immediately show me a number. But the moment the CSR bill came and we started approaching corporates, they had hierarchies and they were answerable to management to say that, look, you're giving money to an organization. I hope we're getting some numbers that tell us that they're using this money in a way that's relevant. So what we did was to approach IIMB many years ago, I think around 2013, about almost 12 years ago, and say, can you make a model for us that will allow us to extract certain information post, say, a class session with the kids? And if we do that over a long period of time and we have enough data, can we then use that information to gauge, okay, how much have we actually had in terms of impact, right? So we were looking at creativity, curiosity, innovation, and then a lot of the donors, especially corporate donors, said we want science learning even as a part of that, and confidence. I think maybe curiosity was taken out of this equation because it's very tough to measure, but we did have the other 4. And so IIMB made this model, and it made this kind of list of, this checklist that an instructor or an igniter would do post a session. So what we then did was go to kids before a session or before they'd had any interaction with Agastya whatsoever, and we'd run a sort of this round of questions with them, and we'd record their answers, and then we'd do it post every session. And then we'd finally find that at the end of 8 sessions, which is typically the length of one Agastya sort of exposure, you could say, long-term exposure, we found that there was obviously these numbers are looking quite good. So I think we eventually ended up doing it across maybe 300,000 children or so. So quite a large data set. And I think they continue to do this year on year now. And what we found was anywhere between an 8 and a 12% increase in metrics that we had defined that were aligned with curiosity, with creativity rather, innovation, confidence, and science learning. So we found just with 8 exposures, that's 8 to 16 hours of work with an Agastya instructor, kids were actually leveling up to this extent. And so that has been a great way to kind of go and present and say, yes, this is working. The other metric we've seen, which is quite heartwarming, is college enrollment. Agastya has a thing called YILs, Young Instructor Leaders, which are specifically kids who've shown an extremely high aptitude and an inclination and an enthusiasm for learning more. So typically an instructor will then say, okay, from this class, there are like 2 or 3 kids that I think we should then go and maybe spend a little more time with. In some case, these kids are invited to Agastya campus, the Agastya campus for an extended period of time, maybe a week or so. And they get a lot of time with the instructors. They get a lot of exposure to all the labs and different teaching methods there are. And then they go back, to school. And what we found is these YILs have a college enrollment ratio of about 98%. And in developed countries, that figure is close to 75%. In India, as an average, it's about 22%. Kids going from high school to graduation. So when you see that kind of number, you're like, well, I'm having impact. Now, is it because these kids get confident that someone's looking at me and thinking I have aptitude, and so they're pushing themselves harder? It might be that. Is it just the teaching techniques themselves, improving their ability to answer questions and, speak knowledgeably about their topic? It could be that as well. But one way or another, we're seeing this correlation that is obviously Agastya, influenced. So that's extremely good. We think that that's a great metric as well. And the other one we like to show is a pie chart showing the difference between the careers, or rather the professions that their parents had, versus kids who've actually gone through Agastya's programs. So you see this huge shift from the primary sector, from farming, from janitorial staff, from cleaning staff, things like that, to kids who are doing their CAs, kids who've gone into IT, kids who are working in marketing fields. And it's genuinely, anecdotally, it's just now we get flooded with these kind of stories. So we've tried to it's difficult then to keep track, because it's suddenly you'll meet this lady who's maybe doing janitorial work at the Agastya campus herself, whose daughter was as a result of just being around the campus, just got to kind of grow up in this kind of setting. And today she's doing something, she's in IT, or she's a qualified CA. And you would never see that trajectory otherwise. It's quite a tough thing to make that jump in one generation. So Agastya is having that kind of impact. It's quite cool.
Talking about the traditional Indian education system, do you think it really needs to take some inspiration from this model? Because do you also feel that the traditional Indian education system is very, very sort of like bookish or just text-based rather than the more practical approach to it? And do you think that needs to really change a little?
I think it is changing. I think things like Agastya are making people realize, of course, that it wouldn't hurt to kind of start being a little more hands-on, for example, or having kind of interactive sessions, in our own classrooms. I think one of the things Agastya has done very well is to take government school teachers and train them, often without the intention that these teachers would necessarily be part of the Agastya ecosystem. The whole idea is that you go back with a increased appreciation for the profession that you obviously are, a part of, and you're inspired to kind of bring more of that into the classroom. And we saw this, as we call it, a multiplier effect. When we're training a teacher, sending them back out with no strings attached. It's just nice that you came here and we were able to kind of work with you. And then that teacher goes and maybe trains 2 other teachers, or says that, hey, I kind of figured out this new way of approaching this particular concept, and the kids seem to really reciprocate. So why don't we try this in our classroom? And so we've seen that kind of shift also happen at the school level. And as I said, India is and has always been a country that values education. And I think we're reaching a point where we see the rest of the world and we say that, okay, fine, we want to be competitive. We want our kids to have the kind of all-round thinking experience that, comes with this kind of, intervention. And it is happening, I think, slowly. And I think Agastya is just glad to be a catalyst in all of that.
Correct. Agastya stands for a purpose. Do you believe that people find or stumble upon purpose one fine day, or do you think we need to build it up through life, through experiences?
I don't know if it's a one fine day thing. Yeah. I think a lot of us have callings. We probably have little kind of voices in the back of our head saying that, wouldn't it be nice to do something in education? Or we feel strongly about something like, poverty, or we feel strongly about women's rights, for example, right? And again, I always say it's a place of privilege to say I can do something, because a lot of folks don't have that option. their immediate duty is to possibly, survive, or maybe to fend for their families, or to earn money to support their loved ones. So it's not always easy to say, look, I just want to throw everything and do something. In Agastya's case, when Ramji, who himself was in the banking sector, doing extremely well in London, he had a sort of crisis of confidence, or otherwise an epiphany, you could say, wherein suddenly he realized, I think I've done enough, to kind of financially secure my future. Now let me do something that can actually help others. And so he quit everything and came to India and started Agastya as a result. And again, he had planned it in such a way that he knew that he was at least keeping financially at least safe, a little bit safeguarded. So he's not absolutely dropping everything and coming without any kind of safety net. I think it's important, if you have that passion, and if you have that thing at the back of your head, to maybe know when to say, okay, I've done enough in this sphere or in this field, and I'm not maybe letting anyone down. Now it's a very personal thing. I think I've done enough to help everyone around me, and now I need to go from that next chapter and do something that's something quite different. But I think it's difficult to say that everybody should do that. To tell a kid just out of college, don't worry about money, just go and do something that may not be very high paying, or maybe might require you to struggle for many years. There are kids that do that, and some of them have safety nets, some of them don't. But it isn't necessarily advice you'd give someone, when they have other things that they need to take care of.
Okay. So you are a writer yourself. Is there any favorite writer of yours, or any book that inspires you, or that you love reading?
So, well, because fiction is what I started out writing. So obviously, Amitav Ghosh is a huge inspiration for me.
Okay.
Read all his stuff. I think right now Anuradha Roy is doing some amazing work as well. Her stuff is, the kind of books that you read and you kind of get latched on, because the language is so well crafted that you. I think Frederick Bachman is doing a lot of really good stuff. Some of his stuff's been made into movies now, but again, very unusual styles of writing, very unusual storylines that don't necessarily go linearly, but kind of come back and forth. And those are a few that right now that I keep kind of going back to and reading. So.
Okay, good. Okay, so with this, let's do a quick rapid fire round as well with you, which will be more about you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll begin the rapid fire round. Your favorite genre when it comes to reading or writing?
Oh, it should be crime, as in mystery, but then I shuttle between mystery and just, prose heavy writing. Like Amitav Ghosh is not exactly mystery writing, but it's just beautiful language. So I think it kind of shuttles between, I'll do one which is like really well written, and I'll do one that's just sort of masala and just fun because you want to know who the murderer is. So yeah.
Okay. Your favorite TV series or web series or a movie that?
Ooh, right now I think we're doing, Slow Horses has been quite addictive.
Okay.
I think White Lotus just finished. That's actually pretty well made as well. So
I've not watched White Lotus, but I've heard a lot about it.
It's in the news right now, and it's deservedly so. It's very good.
Okay. Yeah. Your favorite travel destination, or perhaps a place that you have not been to, but it's on your bucket list?
Bucket list right now, we love scuba. Actually, my family and I love doing scuba diving. So right now, the last few years, we've just been going to places with very clear water, basically.
Okay.
So Philippines is, I think, next on the list, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. Your inspiration in life?
Somewhere between, I'm very lucky. I've had 3 very good role models. So I've had my grandfather, my uncle, and my dad.
Okay.
So it's been very easy to pick and choose from each of their strengths, and just to kind of decide, okay, that's the me I'm going to be. I'm going to be like him in that. So yeah.
Okay. A quote or a philosophy that you live by?
Everything compounds. So I keep telling my son
your
this.
Your trajectory also kind of reflects that a lot. Yeah.
I think I keep telling my son this because he's like, I'm doing this and I'm learning music and I'm doing this. I'm like, look, at some point all of this starts synergizing. And I've seen it in real life with Ramji, our founder, who, he reads he started reading a crazy amount when he started Agastya. And, I think now you find a lot of this stuff is kind of synergizing with itself. So, something you learned in one place combines with something you read somewhere else, and suddenly you have this whole new insight and say, okay, these two combine to make this. And I think it's true even of, even of general efforts. If you're putting efforts into, say, learning an instrument or running a race or building yourself up, to maybe you're reading a lot, I think you kind of imagine these are all disparate, strains. But I think you don't realize it's all being assimilated. It's some part of your brain. And at some point, I think, I want to say typically after the age of 40, because, that's when you've accumulated enough, you start finding these weird sort of almost alchemy-like ideas that come to you. And you're like, it's true. I kind of, took the effort to go visit a factory once where they were making something in a very weird way. And then 10 years later, I sort of read a book about something else. And a few months later, I went and spoke to someone. And suddenly these three things have just meshed together to an idea that, I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think that's a pretty important thing. So I always tell people, just do as much as you can as early as you can, because like wealth, if you have enough of it early on, it just kind of builds on itself. And I think knowledge does exactly the same thing. And once it starts really compounding, I think you find a lot of folks that you see and you're wondering how are they, consistently churning out good ideas or consistently whacking it out of the park. It's probably because they've spent a lot of time building layer on layer, and suddenly these layers have started sort of interacting with each other and opening whole new worlds of insight. Yeah.
Okay. So if perhaps you are not writing or sitting in the boardroom of Agastya, what would you be doing?
Time with family is probably the funnest thing. Okay. And if they're troubling me, then I'll read a book. So.
Okay. One superpower that you could have, then what superpower would you have?
It's very dangerous, isn't it? I always we think of superpowers, then we don't think of the negative effects.
Yeah.
So I was, because nowadays with Marvel and all, you have ample time to think, okay, if I had that power, what would I do? I think mind reading is a great power to have. Okay. But then you don't always want to know what people are thinking. So that can be dangerous as well. Yeah. So I think maybe speed reading would be a great superpower. If I could just read like a book a day, that would be an amazing, that would be fun.
Okay.
I'm sure it would lead to something. My head would explode or something like that. But I think it's a great way to go. Yeah.
Okay. And last but not the least, if you could be one animal for a day, which animal would you choose and why?
I'd like to be my dog because he's treated very well. And so that would be a good life. A good day would be... But yeah, a lot of folks love dogs, and I do love dogs as well.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see the world from their perspective for a day, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, that was the rapid fire round. And coming back to the podcast, perhaps to whosoever listening to us, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting on to their career and professional journey and not sure, they are not sure of what they want to do life. So what advice perhaps we can give to them?
You're going to do something, you know. So I think when I first started working, I was in research for a bit, and then I moved into consulting, and then I, eventually came and, started running my own business. And I think the important thing is not to stagnate. I think it's very easy to get stuck in a rut and say, okay, I'm going to do the same thing over and over again. And you get good at it sometimes, doing the same thing. And there's a security in repetition sometimes. And I think it's important to step away and say, okay, fine, I have to grow constantly. There's a lot of pressure, in fact, when you say that to yourself. But it can be a very fun journey if you do it the right way. So whether it's reading or whether it's going out and interacting with, meeting new people, they'll always say you benefit when you increase your surface area to an extent, and you never know where the next idea or the next person that might pull you to the next level might be. And so I think the best thing young people can do is increase their surface area, to be honest. Get as much exposure as you can, whether it's through reading, whether it's to, Ramji will always say, I think one of the things in the book that we've mentioned is people love to talk about their experiences. And you'll often see someone that's quite well off or extremely successful in their field. And you'll think, can I go and speak to them? I mean, it's going to be awkward. What if I... But trust me, a lot of the times just going to someone and say, tell me how you did it. Most people want to tell you exactly how they did it, or they want to share their experience with you. And you can learn, we call these curiosity conversations. Just call upon someone that you think might be able to help you or might be able to just, give you a 15 minutes of their time to chat. And you'll be surprised how much you can learn when you have that kind of confidence. So there's a lot out there that you can learn, and I think when you keep kind of trying to layer yourself with new experiences and with new kinds of knowledge, I think it will eventually, as I said, turn into something good. Yeah.
Okay. What advice perhaps we can give to someone who is just starting their writing journey, who wants to be an author particularly?
It's difficult now. I think the publishing space is also it's extremely competitive. There's also a lot of white noise because it's difficult to compete with, say, Instagram or, with YouTube and stuff like that, because you're getting 20-second, 30-second, shots of entertainment. Reading a book is tough. You invest in, typically you're saying I'm investing 2 weeks at least. And, it's going to be every day, reading is tough. It's not, you can find it quite cumbersome. And so being a writer, I think nowadays it's quite fraught with a lot of that. And again, there's a lot of blogs, there's a lot of, pieces being written. So there's plenty of white noise actually. So differentiating, I think, yourself as a writer is quite tough. But I think if you pick the right niche and it works for you, I think a lot of folks are doing a lot of good work, especially in certain genres where they know that, okay, fine, I seem to have a knack for this, and there seems to be a market for it. And that actually has allowed a lot of writers to actually do this full time and make a decent amount of money doing it. But I think it requires, like all things, a kind of sit down and a brainstorming and a really crafting your image, as it were, in terms of what kind of writer you want to be. And the truth is that may not be, like, I love writing satire. It's a lot of fun. None of my books have been, funny at all. And so, it's fun to say, okay, that's my kind of writing, but apparently what works for my reader is when I actually write something a little more, verbose or, more language, flowery in terms of the language. So it's difficult to then make that shift. As creatives, we often feel I have to be true to who I am. But I think if you're looking at it as a profession, you probably need to bend a little bit and say, okay, fine, what is it that what demand is out there that I can then cater to? Because that would be much more sensible if you weren't doing it purely as just a passion project.
Correct. You have been a part of Agastya's journey, and perhaps you're also associated with certain other businesses. So what advice we can give to someone who wants to start their own startup or business? Like, what advice can we give to them?
Again, as we were saying, the startup space is pretty full now. And I think we're now, maybe 2 years ago, we were at a point where you could have an idea and raise money, the next day. It's probably a lot more difficult now. So I think coming with something unique, is obviously the most important thing. We see a lot of Me Too kind of, folks just starting startups because they see somebody else is making money.
Kind of like a fashion
Exactly.
statement, yeah.
And then you just end up competing funding to funding, basically. You're not really coming with anything unique. We've also seen that having an idea in this day and age is not necessarily, that
enough. Yeah.
It's not enough, because the moment it's out there, everybody has the idea, right? So having an idea you can protect is probably a lot more. So maybe even investing time to say, okay, fine, if I do this, the moment I do this, if people see that it's working, I need to expect that there's going to be 7 or 8 others jumping and trying to compete with me. So rather than work on the idea alone, work on the moat you build around the idea. And we learn this in economics, barriers to entry, as we used to call them. And a lot of people don't put them up anymore. So what you end up with is an idea that then, once it's out in the wild, is anyone's idea, to be honest. And then you're just desperately trying to fight to kind of protect your turf, rather than developing an idea and saying, okay, fine, now what am I going to do so that if anybody else wants to get into this, it's going to take them at least 2 years, and in that time I can be, again, extend my lead.
Correct. Okay. You have also been a part of corporate world. So any advices for the corporate folks out there?
No, corporate's a very different beast, right? It's an extremely political world, and I think I'm always kind of glad that it's not part of my world anymore. And it's difficult to navigate through. But I think I read this interesting thing about someone was evaluating whether nice guys finish last.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting piece where they actually did a study, and they interviewed different companies about folks within the organization. And they realized that nice people, surprisingly, either are at either end of the organization. So you typically finish last, or you finish way first. Right? And we've seen this with a lot of CEOs and stuff. They seem like really nice guys, and I think they are, because they kind of come up because they haven't ruffled anyone's feathers or really created any enemies along the way. And I think when you've been in a company for 10, 15, 20 years, it's very tough to be ingenuine and get to that point. So I think being a nice guy actually really works. I think someone said this of my grandfather, which was he reached the very top without elbowing his way up there, which is a nice thing for someone to say about someone. He was, a chairman of a company and he was CEO of other companies. And even now when people talk about him, they're like, this was a very nice person that everyone was very happy to see kind of move to the next level because he hadn't really annoyed anyone, at the level he was at. And so I think it makes sense to be, even though people say, oh no, you got to be aggressive and cutthroat and kind of do what you got to do. I think a lot of the times you see that the folks that actually make it right to the top are probably the nicest folks because, they have content and they have the interpersonal kind of acumen needed to kind of get there without burning bridges and kind of, stabbing anyone along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little hard to hear and believe because normally when we hear the corporate world, it's normally all the office drama, office politics, like pulling everyone down to get up and all of that.
Yep.
So it's nice to hear, to be nice is perhaps the way up.
I mean, I may have been lucky in that I've been exposed to companies where that actually works. And I know different cultures are, different in the way that what they see as, as relevant. But I think if you're in a company with good folks, I think being a nice guy really helps. You kind of, it resonates well with the organization. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I know a lot of advices you have given out right now, but any advice to anyone, like not even an advice, a message to everyone listening to us?
I think the only message I should be saying now is, please learn more about Agastya and understand the kind of work that we do. We've been lucky, as I said, to draw people with the right attitudes, but that journey is continual. It's not ended in any way. And so we need good people and we need good folks, especially we need financing as well. The engine doesn't run unless, people are bringing in money. And so one of the ideas of writing the book was to actually give this story out there. And we hope, in fact, that we kind of quite clearly said there's three kinds of people that would benefit from reading the book. One would be, young kids, who want to get into social entrepreneurship at some point. So it serves as a great manual for saying, okay, fine, if I want to do this, then what are the steps involved and what are the challenges that I'm going to face? And so it's a very good ready reckoner for a kid or a young person that wants to become a social entrepreneur. It's also a great organizational design kind of manual. I think the way that Agastya went about building its structure is a beautiful case study in the way an organization should build itself. So as I said earlier, the camaraderie and the kind of oneness that was there during COVID, that doesn't happen overnight. A culture has to be nurtured to the point where you keep respect and excellence and caring for one another as the core of your belief. And if you let that go, then at some point you'll start finding that folks are kind of just looking out for themselves. And we've seen in Agastya that the way they've done it has really built a culture of caring, within the organization. And we've had a lot of corporates come and say, wow, you guys are doing stuff wherein, we have folks in Delhi and the main hub is in the south. So folks working, thousands of kilometers away from the main hub, but who nonetheless keep the culture alive, in the way that they work, even though they're working in a kind of very remote and insulated way. So again, that doesn't happen unless the organization creates a framework to keep that kind of alive. And I think they've done a brilliant job in that. And, we see a lot of organizations come and say that, look, we want to grow, but we're always worried that once we scale up beyond a certain point, we're going to lose that initial kind of culture, that initial spark that made us who we are.
Correct.
And so it's a great book for that. And the third thing we are honestly hoping is that, potential donors and folks that want to get involved in philanthropy, read the book, hear the story. And we've already had folks come to us saying, wow, we had no idea you guys had this kind of struggle, or we had no idea these were the kind of hurdles you had to jump across, or that you were doing this kind of work at the back end to make sure the quality and the kind of purity of the organization sustains. And then you've had them step forward and say, okay, how do I become a part of this? So whether you're a donor or whether you're someone that, say, maybe is reaching the point in your career where you want to jump and join an organization that is doing genuine good, and you will not be disappointed, I suppose, when you step in to know that it is as rosy on the inside as it looks on the outside. So, yeah. So
You know, you were talking about Agastya's journey and sort of like a case study from an organizational point of view. So was there any lesson, like something that Agastya did and then later realized should not have done for like perhaps an organization to learn from? Things that should not have been done?
I think very early on they realized that remote management won't work.
Okay.
Right. So I think one of the first, North Karnataka was the first place we expanded beyond the Kuppam campus. So the campus is there, and around the campus we were doing a lot of work. And the mobile vans were in sort of Kolar and the regions within maybe 50 or 100 kilometers at most. And suddenly we were told, okay, there's the government of Karnataka was saying that, look, we want to try and see if you guys can succeed in the north, which is again 6-7 hours drive from campus. So I think initially there was this idea that, okay, let's just send folks there and let them, do their thing. And very quickly they realized that, okay, everyone's just doing something completely different, or they're just trying to find their own way and it's clashing, or it's not necessarily what we have kind of developed. And so today, Agastya spends a lot of time sending folks what we call IMTs, instructor master trainers, is a network of highly trained instructors. And it's a very sought after position even within the organization. You have to write exams and you have to kind of really show your capability. And their job is to kind of audit and visit classrooms and give constructive, on the ground kind of immediate feedback to the instructors. So you watch a class and then at the end of the class you have a session with this guy where you say, okay, fine. For example, you spent way too much time introducing Agastya. We have 2 minutes, we only have 2 hours. So the time allotted for what is Agastya should not be more than 2.5 minutes, because you have to jump into the content immediately after that. Or that you're giving a lot of attention to, like the boys are very active in your class, which does tend to happen in India. The girls are sitting quiet, silently in the corner, because boys are more boisterous, and because you're giving them a lot of your attention, the girls are maybe feeling that they're not, they're marginalized, or that their opinion doesn't count. So you've got to start, bringing the whole class together and making the whole thing more inclusive. So stuff like that is something that we actively, kind of work on now. And it didn't start out that way. We really felt that, okay, we can just give them the instructions, give them the models, and it should work. And so, that was a key learning right at the beginning that we knew was not going to work. Remote management actually doesn't really have any impact.
So like centralization and just having a whole sort of like, at least in the initial years, is important.
Exactly. An ecosystem wherein, you are constantly have a thread connecting you with a guy, even if he's in Delhi, for example, and you're in Bangalore. And then we have these very elaborate science fairs. And during the science fairs, people come from all over the country. All the Agastya staff come in to help on these mega science fairs. We used to call them, so around 40,000 kids come over, a few days. And so you need all hands on deck. And so we use these science fairs again as sort of melting pots, as watering hole, meeting points. You're an instructor in Bangalore, you suddenly make friends with a guy who's in Bihar, and then now you guys are exchanging ideas. And when he goes back tomorrow, he might call you and say, hey, listen, so that kind of network that we built even within the organization, it is rich enough that it holds the culture in a way that we know that we're doing the right thing regardless of where the guy is sitting.
So okay, moving towards the end of the podcast, what next for you? Is there any upcoming book of yours or anything?
Yeah, so I do have another work of fiction that is currently in the works.
Okay.
But like all things, whether it does or does not see the light of day, we don't know.
Okay.
So I'm working on that. But yeah, I guess the next few months will be very Agastya-centric, because we're trying to push the book and get the awareness out there to as many people as we can. And I think that's going to keep me busy, at least for the near future. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I guess all the very best with the Agastya centric work with the book. I hope that it reaches to as many people as possible. I hope Agastya reaches to as many people as possible, because obviously the work that Agastya is doing is inspiring, to say the least. And I don't think any other organization right now is at least doing such a thing in the educational space so far, what Agastya is doing. So I think kudos to that. Kudos to your journey with Agastya. And it was so nice to have you here. I hope that you enjoyed the podcast.
I did extremely. Thank you so much. And
Thank you
yeah,
so much.
to your listeners, please go out and get a copy of the book.
Yeah.
And it's available on Amazon.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'd love to hear and review it if you can, because it's always helpful for as you know, it always helps.
Correct. Okay. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.